Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Observances with Daniel Thompson. I am Daniel Thompson. For those who don't know me, I'm an independent journalist based in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I am the owner, editor-in-chief, and founder of the Uptown Observer, which is a digital news site based in Kenosha, and also serves as a sponsor of this podcast, the Uptown Observer, independent journalism for the people, funded by the people. That's right. My paper, well, digital site, I guess, is funded completely by my supporters who subscribe to make monthly donations to the Uptown Observer to continue the work that I do and projects such as Observances with Daniel Thompson. So now that I have all that out of the way, for this second episode, I want to focus on something that is a topic that I definitely was going to address at some point, and I might as well get it out in the beginning. And that's alienation. And obviously, if you know me and know everything I've talked about, the biggest source of discrimination in my life is because I'm a man. Joking. No, I want to explore actually it through two lenses. And the first one is because I am biracial. Actually, biracial is kind of a misnomer because I'm multiracial. I'm African American, I'm German, British, Native American, and I believe a touch of Irish, although all my drinking comes from the Germans. So it's interesting to have grown up or to have been a biracial person or to exist as a biracial person. Because there are certain truths you come to know throughout your life about being biracial. For one, you come to know that your existence, your very existence, just existing, angers some people who don't believe in the mixing of races. You are an abomination to them. You also find out that the funniest things, and I think one of the funniest jokes for biracial people that I've seen, like, in pop culture in the past 10, 20 years, to me, was actually a Family Guy reference, where it was one of the characters was turned biracial, and he was just like, oh, I'll be accepted by everybody. There is a weird segregation within the white and black communities that happens with biracial people. We're never fully accepted as, let's just focus on white and black. We're never fully accepted by either group. Throughout my life, I have bounced back and forth like a ball in a game of Pong more times than I can count between, oh, Daniel's white, oh, Daniel's black. And it's all depending on if I was acting white or black at any given time. Because while, yes, you walk in both worlds, neither one lets you be part of them. And people try to comfort you with things like, oh, well, you're the best of both worlds. Yeah, well, neither world really appreciates their deficiencies being pointed out in physical form. Which is what we are, biracial people. If that example follows through, or that affirmation. So it's always interesting. And it was interesting to grow up with that as the background. You feel, I grew up around the majority of black kids. Like, I would hang out in Silver Park in Racine, which was just down the block from me, and it would just be a swarm of kids just covering a basketball court. Like, we had pickup games that were like 20 people on each side. It was ridiculous. And at Silver Park, I was accepted until I wasn't. At some point, one of my friends started getting more and more aggressive with me and treating me like I was an outsider. And then it got to a point where I just stopped going so much as I got older, and then I just disconnected from all those people. because I started to feel that. And I don't know why it happens. I really don't. But there's also unique problems or situations that biracial people have faced in just discrimination in general in the time of Jim Crow, in the time of slavery, in the time of everything else. Because, and there are multiple references to that. There's the story The Wife of My Youth, and there's a book called, I believe, The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man that I read in college. And they all talk about this thing that biracial people could do if they so chose, a sacrifice they could make to have an easier life. And that is this: if you were light-skinned enough, you could decide to pass, which what that basically was is you would cut all the ties with your black family, and you would decide to live as a white person. And that is something that biracial people could do. It was a heartbreaking decision they could make, but yeah, they had the option to cut the cord on being black. But it came with their own sacrifices, and they had to live with that secret basically for the rest of their lives, some of them. And they never got to be themselves. Either they got to live as a black person and be kept down, or they got to live as a white person but have to sacrifice everything that they had come from. So I would read about those things when I was a kid, and struggling with identity, and also struggling with this growing feeling of just always feeling out of place. Always feeling out of place among the people that I should have belonged with. And I never did. But as I got older, race, as much as we focus on it lately in the past couple of years, to be honest, race didn't play the biggest role in my life. I point out kind of how it shaped how I think about things or see things. But as far as the day-to-day, it wasn't like it is now. I wasn't forced to be involved in issues or things like that because of my race. Most of the time, my race was secondary or third. It wasn't what most people approached me with first. But there was a shift. So I had been called. Actually, this is a funny little anecdote, but there's also a confusion with being biracial. So you get in trouble for saying some things like, okay, so background. My brothers, my two older brothers are darker than myself and my next oldest brother. They are, one of them is black. So the dynamic that happened between all of us is that my darker brothers or darker skinned brothers will get away with different things that I can't, or people won't challenge them on things. And specifically, this comes with the use of the N-word, I've come to find out. Which, N-word alert, I guess, for the story I'm about to tell, but also side note to that, if you take offense to a black person saying a word that was used for hundreds of years to both keep down and also said while beating, raping, or generally making the lives miserable of their ancestors. If you take issue with the person who comes from a bloodline where the word was used as such destruction, saying that word, you can take that complaint and you can stick that in the farthest reaches of your mind, and you can just leave it there. Because I don't care. So When I was about 8 and I was in second grade, my brothers used to say a particular thing around the house, here and there. And so I took this thing that would play on a Winnie the Pooh character, um, and I went to school. And during recess, I was hanging out with one of my friends who was black. Like me and this person, Greg, were the only two black kids. So we're just sitting there at recess, and we used to talk about like random stuff. And also just like black, like it was the only time that me and him got to be like somewhat black, you know? So what I did is I told him, I like shared with him what my brothers had been saying around the house, which was the wonderful thing about niggas is niggas a wonderful thing. And we both kind of laughed about it, but there was this white girl that was kind of in earshot. And as soon as I had finished saying it, I saw her kind of walk away. And I was like, huh, that's weird. So I ended up getting in trouble. And the teacher yelled at me, and then the principal yelled at me. And the whole time I'm thinking, and I don't know if I said it out loud, and I might have said it to my mom when I got home, but I was like, I don't get it because I think I can say that. But yeah, there's a lot of confusion. But you get used to it, honestly. Like, the thing that is most common that I got throughout my life, besides people fawning over my eyes, which I appreciate it. I do. I don't mean to minimize, people's reaction or their courtesy in paying me a compliment. Um, it's just kind of a weird thing for me because it's been since I was a child that people run up and like stare, like women would run up when I was a child and be like this close to my face, just staring at my eyes. And my mom was just fine. Like, I'm sure sometimes she was offensive, but she's like, oh yeah, they just want to look at Daniel's eyes again. That's weird. But I experienced that throughout my entire life. So it's kind of a point of, okay, cool, thanks. Like, I get it. You're experiencing them for the first time, but this has been 31 years for me. Like, thanks. Cool. Word. But anyway, I'm used to people looking at me sometimes as if I'm like the Venus Hottentot, okay? People do. People stare. And they always have because anything that is somewhat ambiguous, people have to try to figure out. They have to try to fill that in. So throughout my life, the thing that is common, or the common, consistent, and most prevalent kind of, not side effect, but kind of staple of biracial life is that people are going to stare at you, and not only are they going to stare, some people are going to reach a point where they just can't take it anymore, and they have to ask you the question, what are you? Which, for the record, I am totally fine telling people what, my racial background is and ancestry, all of that. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I find it really fascinating, honestly. But just like with anything, it's how you're approaching somebody. And the way that some people have approached it, especially in more rural areas. So fundamentally, let me break down the question, what are you? Coming from another human being. If you watch television, movies, any pop culture thing, when a main character turns to another character and says, what are you? They've either done something horribly monstrous that makes the other character feel like they're subhuman, or they've done something that reveals that they are not, in fact, either human or of the same mortal or physical conditions of the main character. They are something other. So fundamentally, you're asking me, What thing that is not like me or possibly human are you? In my mind, that's kind of how it hits me. Instead, you could be like, hey, so I know this is going to be really forward and I'm sorry, but I'm really curious about, you know, your racial background and ancestry, and even if you'd be willing to talk about it, like I'm into that kind of thing. Like, yeah, that's weird, but that's pleasant. That at least is kind of like a human way of dealing with it. Instead of this. So these are two examples I can think of off the top of my head from when I was in Kimmel, Nebraska, which I talked about in the last episode. And this would have been between 2012 and 2014 that these two would have taken place. But the first one, so I was in one of the grocery stores in town, one of the two grocery places. And I was like checking out. And there's this older woman that I'm getting like the Hottentot like stare from, right? And I can feel it. Like through it has happened so many times in my life that I can feel when people are doing it and I know how to treat it. I just don't make eye contact. Because the truth is, if you don't make eye contact with somebody who's staring at you, they will not feel comfortable. They will not feel like there's an opening to just say something. I learned that very early on. So I normally avoid eye contact. However, the way that, you check out and everything, you're kind of looking around back and forth and everything like that. So when I'm looking back, met eyes, and she afterwards, I can tell when somebody sees it as like, he locked eyes, like he's okay with me approaching him, like after this is done, it's fine. And so she did, and she was like, it wasn't even what are you? Actually it was at first, it was what are you? And then I was like, sometimes I mess with people by listing black last. I know that's the one they're looking for. So I'm just like, German, British, Native American, bit of Irish. And then I'm like, African American. And when I said African American, she snapped and she was like, that's where you get your color from. And in my mind, I was just like, what? Like, it was, sometimes something happens that is so like racist. And I'm not saying like maliciously racist, but just so racist, like objectively, that it's like Dave Chappelle said, it's like, God damn, that was racist. And you're just like I'm just staring at her. And the thing is, a lot of people would react like angrily, but the part of having a life of dealing with racism is that you get to know the different kinds of racism. There's the aggressive, malicious racism that you see in, quite honestly, mostly militant, middle-aged white men. That's just facts. I mean, well, okay. That is the empirical evidence I've seen from everything I've covered in 8 years pertaining to that issue. You get the ignorant racism, which is people who just do not know facts. They've been fed a whole bunch of lines by people they trusted, and they never double checked. And therefore, they've been used and brainwashed. And honestly, that's kind of why we have what's going on with the election this year going on. The third is people who say racist things, but are not necessarily racist people. This old woman, to me, fell in the last category. Because afterwards, she was like, my friends told me that'd be rude to ask you, but I figured since you're so nice, you'd be comfortable with it and everything like that. And she explained, and I realized that I'm in a city of 2,500 that is overwhelmingly white. Most of these people have actually never left the city, never lived elsewhere. So their exposure to other races, their exposure to how to discuss things with other races, how to approach people of other backgrounds, that learning, that training, that just what happens with experience, how you weed out like the awful approaches and find the right way to connect with people. They didn't have the opportunity for that. So in that scenario, and actually in the next one that I'm about to point out, it was, yeah, God damn, that's racist. The statement, as far as the old woman, she was actually pretty nice to me, both then and later on throughout my time in Kimball. And I'd find that is that, quite honestly, there are people that can be manipulated to hold racist ideas, but in their hearts, they are legitimately not racist. It is a mind-boggling thing to experience or to witness, but it exists. I've encountered it multiple times, believe it or not. And, of course, you can believe me or not. I mean, I can't give you gospel truth that you're going to believe wholeheartedly because I have a microphone and a webcam and that thing. Isn't that kind of weird? I didn't even intentionally set it up that way. Freaks me out every time. But the second example is actually really funny to me now. And it was funny then. But it's funny because of the people reach a breaking point with curiosity. And you can see them snap. So I was in a diner in Kimball. Literally, the name of it was The Diner, out by the interstate. And I was there with the person that I was dating at the time. And so I'm facing out towards the windows. There's a man sitting further in the room, like back along the windows facing the street, like across the room. And the person I'm dating is facing me. So they're turned away from him, but I'm turned towards him. And so, again, I start to get that feeling that, there's that look. And so I am trying my best to avoid eye contact. But again, we're facing each other, and I look around a lot when I'm sitting around somewhere. So eventually, it happened. And whereas the older woman in the first example waited a good couple seconds or something, like kind of so that she could reach me and we could talk about it kind of like quieter or private, actually have a conversation. Nah, not this guy. This guy straight up cocked his head back and he yelled across the diner, "Hey, you Black Irish?" And I stared at him and I was like, "What?" Again, we're both yelling back and forth across a diner. Luckily, there wasn't anybody else really in there besides the staff at the time. But he's like, "Yeah, are you?" And he's like, "What are you?" And I was like race? And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay. I'm German, British, Native American, Irish, African American." And I swear to God, when I said African American, he apparently didn't hear it right. And he just yelled back Afro American. And I was just like, Afro American? Word? Have you not updated your race vocabulary since the 70s? Jesus. Were you calling people colored still 2 years ago? It would just weird me out. And then he went on to be like, "Oh, yeah, Black Irish. I just asked because, I have relatives that are like that and things." that are Black Irish, and I thought you looked like them. And again, it's a situation where dude just snapped. People snap sometimes when they look at me. Like, my racial ambiguity drives people nuts. I've had people when I was in high school, I had people slide me like applications for like scholarships for like Mexicans. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm not Mexican. And they're like, really? I'm like, no, that's not the one. Some people have thought I'm Israeli, Puerto Rican, Mediterranean, I think I got. But those are examples of racist comments and not racist people to me. And that changed over time. I mean, it's weird. You think that rural areas are more racist than cities. And yeah, in many ways, but it's a different kind of racism. It's either the ignorant racism. Well, okay, let me rephrase that because I can't talk for every rural place. In the rural places that I've lived, in the states that I've lived, Nebraska, Indiana, and Wisconsin, the rural places in Nebraska and Indiana that I've encountered, that I've worked, it is the ignorant and the racist comments, but not racist people that I encounter. They just don't know. And they don't know how to learn. They're surrounded by people that think just like them. And yeah, some people in these areas think differently, but they're driven out. They move away and they don't really come back. So these areas are just left with the same ideology passed down from generation to generation. And these people are written off, and we don't try to expose them to anything because we just find them to be ignorant, and they'll always be ignorant. So we actually ended up writing them off like they write us off. Ha. Anyway. Honestly, I have developed such a thick skin with race over my life that you can call me a nigger, you can call me a half-breed, you can call me a mud baby, you can call me... Moon cricket actually is a racist term that I don't really get. It's like too pleasant to be racist. But you can call me any horrible racist thing you want. You will never break my spirit because of that. I've been through too much. I've come back from too much. Your words will never break me. So yeah, things have gotten... I've encountered the more aggressive racism lately, but it's nothing to me. It's something that needs to be eradicated, but it doesn't hurt my feelings. It pisses me off. It pisses a lot of people off. And the thing that I think a lot of those people are finding is that we're not scared anymore. We're just angry. And I say that, and here's the thing, I don't want any conflict between the races. You realize that we are better together. There are things that each race has, natural things built into them, that are benefits to humanity. But for some reason, we decide that keeping all of that separate is better, instead of racially making $6 million people by just not keeping ourselves apart because this stupid thing we've decided divides us. We could be so much better as a species, as a race, if we just learn to look at each other as humans that come in kind of different colors, shapes, sizes, but all humans. So that's the race part of alienation. The other part, and I saved this story for the end because I still get pretty upset about it, even while finding it hilarious, because of how badly it set me back. So, personally, not professionally, but personally. So, when I was in Kimball, I used to write a column called Thompson's Take, which I continued when I became editor and publisher. And often it was, I would write opinion pieces. They were all opinion. But I would take on some national issues. And because I was in a conservative town, and because, quite frankly, I hadn't developed the level of objectivity or self-awareness as far as what I was presenting to the public as I do now, I would often find myself leaning really far left in what I was writing. More reactionary than actually having a conversation. But still, noted that it was my opinion. On one particular time, I think it was about my opinion of the Hobby Lobby and birth control and everything like that issue back in the day. So I wrote a column on it. And then I got a really angry, condemning letter from a local pastor about my opinion. Calling it an article, which, for the record, is one of my biggest pet peeves when people call a column an article. A column is an opinion, an article is truth, news, fact. So, I thought the angry letter was the end of it, and I printed the letter. But then he stopped in my office and told my office manager, because he wasn't going to talk to me, that he had given a sermon about the whole thing the past Sunday, and that it was online. So, me being me, I was about 23, 24 at the time. I got super drunk and listened to the sermon, and that man was pretty mad at me. He gave a legit hour-long sermon about me. Like, no joke. An hour-long sermon about me and my column. Just tearing into me. My favorite line is the one that I'll never forget is, "Our fight is not against Daniel Thompson of the Western Nebraska Observer. Daniel Thompson is only a pawn being used by the devil and his minions." Favorite part. I mean, 2 years into a journalism career and I'm a pawn of the devil and his minions? Really? I mean, I made it, right? And yeah, that was the most maybe alienating thing that had happened to me. Because I grew up in the church. My father's a pastor. In fact, I'm at his church every Sunday now. I play on the worship team. And I've found my faith again. But back then, I was struggling so much to reconcile all the pain that I had and all the problems I had with the Christian faith and the church. Many problems I still have, though I've come back. And then, as I'm trying, and I'm an alcoholic, I mean, I'm badly craving some form of salvation or redemption or a sign that I'm not too far gone. And then I get to hear an hour-long sermon about how I am. from a man purporting to be speaking on behalf of the God that I had loved. So for years, I wouldn't set foot in a church. I was angry. I would often yell at my father when we had religious debates, to the point of where he made it very clear that I wasn't allowed to talk to him about anything while I was drunk. Which was fair, because I used to be a pretty big asshole. Hopefully he finds me to be less of one now. But I did write a response to the pastor, and I didn't tear into him, but I explained how he had failed me in his role as a pastor. Say that this man had thought that I had lost my way, or that in fact I was being used by the devil. That would mean that I'm lost. But instead of being the shepherd that he was called to be, to go out looking for that one lost sheep, he decided instead to turn around and talk shit about that one lost sheep to the other 99 and write them off. To blame them because they see things differently. And it embodied so much of the stubbornness and the closed-mindedness and the lack of compassion that I saw in the church, and exactly why I'd left, that it solidified my break from Christianity and the church for 8 years. 8 years after that. Yeah, I played at the church, but it was a favor for my dad in that period. I hated it. I hated God. I hated church. I hated Christians. To this day, I do resent many of them, which I have to work on because of what they've made, again, of the religion and the God that I love. And there's nothing really more alienating than being told, essentially, you're not good. And I don't know why that's so heartbreaking, but it is. I don't think it was long after that I left Kimball. But the truth is, no matter where I went, alienation followed me, and it always will. And it follows a lot of us. The world isn't ready to accept some things. But that just means that it's our job to get it there. And I hope that I can do my small part in that. Well, I think that's enough about you guys listening to me being or feeling alienated or, down and blah, blah, blah from years ago. That's been another episode of Observances with Daniel Thompson. Please continue coming back. I do have a lot of stories to tell. And again, they're not all going to be dark. Some of them are light. Some of them are funny. Some of them are thought-provoking. Even to me, still to this day, there are stories. There are things that I have experienced that I think of that are continual sources of reevaluation in my life. And those are the types of things that I want to share with you. Because they can't just stay in my head, or they're just going to die with me. If you'd like to support the Uptown Observer and my writing, you can do so by visiting facebook.com/theuptownobserver. You can also find me at racinecountyeye.com under the Kenosha Lens section. And generally, you can find me on Twitter as @oldfashionednews. You can also find me generally by the hashtag thatunemployededitor. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful day, night, or whatever time you're watching this. Remember, everybody around you is a human being. A human being who needs love, affection, hope, light, and who wither when they don't have those things. Please treat people accordingly. So long for now.